Are you ready to dive into Stoic Empathy on this episode? This is the Scale You podcast, where every single season we're focusing on different ways you can scale yourself further, whether it's in business or in life. In season 1, we focused on entrepreneurship. Season 2, we focused on becoming a digital nomad. Season 3, we focused on how it's like to have multiple businesses. And right now on season 4, we're starting it. This is the first interview we're doing. We're focused on the different philosophies and different backgrounds of people who have written books. These are authors. These are people who are scaling themselves and scaling their minds, basically, and their message through writing books and publishing them and putting them out into the world. So all of these amazing people that we're going to be interviewing for the season, their books are going to be in the description, so make sure to grab them. And it's going to be a very interesting journey getting to know a lot of these people who put their mind into paper. We're going to dive into their stories, how they came up with their book, how they wrote it, their struggles, and also the magic that has happened ever since. So if you're ready to ditch the grind, let's go over and scale you. Now, our guest today is a globally recognized negotiation consultant, law professor, author, and TEDx producer, whose transformative work in empathy, stoicism, and complex negotiation has influenced audiences from corporate boardrooms to university classrooms and international stages. Okay, guys, so please help me welcome our amazing guest today, Charmaine. Hi, Charmaine.
Hi, Leanne. How are you?
I'm good. Excited to have you here. I love having women entrepreneurs, or women in general, honestly, on the podcast, mostly because I've had too many podcasts that I've listened to before that mostly males. I'm excited to have some girl energy, especially still in the month of March. So what I love to, when I was looking you up, when my assistant gave me your packet of information, is you have a very extensive, very interesting background. I saw you just did a TEDx a few months ago, which looks like really, really interesting, and I have it blogged on my YouTube myself to watch. But before we go into all of where you're at now, I would love to know where you were, like who were you before all of this, kind of walking us through your background.
Of course, yeah. Thank you so much for having me on, and it's a pleasure to be on the show, especially in March. I was born in Iran in 1977, and I'm really dating myself now. That's 2 years before the Iranian Revolution, and immediately in the aftermath of the revolution, things were pretty bleak in Iran, and there was a war launched between Iran and Iraq, and a lot of people lost their lives during that war, and there was a lot of civilian casualties as well. I immigrated to Canada. Post-immigration, I promised myself that given this opportunity to excel and exceed in ways that perhaps I couldn't had my parents not made these sacrifices, I am going to find and forge my path in the corporate world and in corporate leadership. And that eventually, long story short, led me to law school. I went to law school, I graduated, I joined a firm, and I ended up working with international conglomerates, primarily fashion conglomerates like the LVMH group, et cetera, for almost 20 years, and understanding as much about the different aspects of their business as any lawyer would, and really like the relationship between real estate and acquisitions and trademarks and employee rights and transfer taxes when you're moving money from one arm to another arm in different countries and what that looks like. And so I became extremely familiar with that work and got to sort of live in the world of fashion, which was really quite lovely and very emotionally and intellectually challenging. Throughout all this time, though, my overall focus, when I was a child in Iran, when I was a student in law school who had never, ever been even inside a building, to when I was in these boardrooms working with some of the most powerful people in the world. And now I'm actually on the board of the NACD, which means I advise the National Association of Corporate Directors. So I advise directors of public companies. And so this is the world that I've transitioned to. But throughout all this time, the commonality was this need to read the room, to walk into the room and being able to read the room. And that ability to read the room and respond to the room and expand my influence within the room extended eventually to my study of Stoicism, which was reading myself and controlling myself and influencing myself. And ultimately, that's what became the book that I'd love to talk to you guys about, Stoic Empathy. And I think that pretty much sums up most of my corporate background. I will also tell you that I co-own a business with my husband. He operates it. I don't operate it, but I am majority owner of the business. So I do have a foothold in grassroots entrepreneurship as well. But the bulk of my experience has been in the international world. And I retired from practice a few years ago, and now I teach. I teach cross-border transactions, and I work with students of Masters of Science and Law from Northwestern here in Chicago, where I live, to help them do exactly the sorts of things your podcast tries to do.
So that is really amazing. And I love that background because you kind of walk through a little bit of what I usually call like the usual path that people go through in life. Like what are the things that are expected, but then you found your vision, your calling, your umph, basically with I love that name, by the way, that term, Stoic Empathy.
Thank you.
Say that again, Stoic.
Stoic Empathy, right? The intersection between Stoicism, which is your control over yourself, your influence over yourself, your awareness of yourself, and empathy, which is essentially your awareness of others and can potentially lead to your ability to influence others.
That's beautiful. And the reason I love that is like in a lot of the books that we see, like I love, as obviously with my background, I read like 50 to 60 books a year. When you walk into a bookstore, it's either books on Stoicism or books on empathy. And I love that you've kind of really combined both.
And it's very gendered, right? Speaking of International Women's Month, it's also very gendered who goes into which section of the bookstore.
Yes. And I'm gonna dive into a little bit of like a funny story of that. Of like, for me, I have a business partner who's basically, I call him my business brother because we've known each other our whole 20s basic at this point, doing business together. And it's obvious because like he would reach for the Stoic books and I would reach for the Brene Browns of the books, basically. So that is the reality of it. And that's happened to the two of us a bajillion times when we walk into a room. And like if you look at his library versus like my library, it is that of like his books are mostly Stoicism, most of my books are about empathy. So tell me more about that journey of them combining both, of finding a way to that control, basic, not really freely control, of like being able to, like I said, observe self and then observing others. What was that journey like of writing that book? What were the kind of the stories you had to go through, your own science from the universe of like, okay, this is the kind of book I want to write?
Yeah. I love your use of the language science from the universe. Once I began writing the book, I really started to reflect on the fact that this is the journey I've been on since childhood. So one of the things I'd love for you to imagine for a moment is you are a child, right? 11 years or younger, and you're living under an oppressive regime that requires you to be something that you are not in order to keep yourself and your family safe. So when you leave the house, you are something else than when you are in the house. And you're amidst a war. So what I was observing, what I was doing, but also what I was observing my parents do, is refrain from shell shock at the moment of a missile attack so as to not traumatize me. Right? Conform to different situations to the point where I think at some point we actually forgot who we really even are, right? Because knowing who you are and staying true to it are luxuries. And we just had to conform in order to stay safe. And then post-immigration, the struggle was actually less about finding the control and more about finding the authenticity while retaining the control. Because that was my challenge. It was like, I already know how to conform, how to change who I am, and even change how I feel. Naturally, I evolved this way as a child, growing up in these circumstances, right? But let me try to siphon down what are the tools that I use in order to do that, and to what extent is it harming my authenticity, and to what extent is it promoting my authenticity, and then trying to refocus myself on that, and always remembering that empathetic aspect of the formula and the conversation, which is my awareness of others doesn't necessarily need me to change who I am, but it can change how I message things, right? It can change it to the extent I want to influence this individual, whether they're a jury or a judge or a spouse or a business partner or a vendor or consumer or whoever it might be, to the extent I want to influence them. What is it that will be successful for them? And to what extent can I do that while still maintaining my own moral values and remaining true to myself? And so that's been really my journey. And it's been such an incredible and fascinating exploration of not just my own nature, but also human nature. And earlier you mentioned that I was a TEDx speaker, which I appreciate. Thanks for plugging my TEDx talk, Leanne. So
of course.
I have 3 talks out there, but I'm a TEDx producer. I've produced over 80 TED and TEDx talks. And so I get to meet people who come to me with these really incredible, ideas. And I get to be the one to help them find that vision, that authenticity, but also that way of appealing to an audience in a manner that would make them open to shifting the way they think about the world, right? So yeah.
That's beautiful. And I can understand from your background as well of and also just life in general, that there is that survival mode where you do have to be that, like I said, you have to conform, you have to be this way and forget about who you are, because then you just need that to survive, to get to the next thing. And then of course, coming out of that, there is that phase of figuring out, okay, now that I've survived that, who am I? Who was that person? Or do I want to continue being that person? And I know a lot of people can have experienced that. The other day, I interviewed someone who, at 26, almost survived basically an almost fatal car accident. And for him, he had to go through that journey of okay, now going through the waves and then finding out what he wanted to do for himself. So it is that natural journey, and I love that for what you do for speakers of TEDx. I'm a speaker myself. That's one of the pure magic that I found in the world, is being able to talk to a lot of people. I can imagine that you're the kind of person who would kind of make sure that the light is shined on where they can shine best. Because I've seen so many TEDx videos myself, especially when I was in my early 20s, where I was obsessed and watching all of them, just because the stories that comes out of it. So from that, I would love to know a little bit of kind of where do you get stuck, or where do other people get stuck when they're working towards that Stoic empathy? Maybe from your stories from it, where you got stuck, or from the people that you worked with moving forward, basically, once you started creating that pattern or formula for other people as well.
It's an excellent question. And in the answer, you will find yourself and your partner, because there's a big range in where people get stuck. Some people get stuck in being so engaged and involved in their awareness of others and their awareness of the feelings of the others and their feeling of the feelings of the others, that they lose themselves and they lose their power in that situation. They might even lose their moral clarity because of the way they feel in that situation, or at a minimum, they might allow something occur that would otherwise be unfair because they're so overwhelmed by their feelings. Other people get stuck because they have shut themselves off from emotions to such a stoic extent, right? If you're listening to this podcast instead of looking at the video, I just put that in air quotes, the word stoic in air quotes, because it's actually not stoicism. Stoicism is emotional regulation, not emotional blockage. But there are people who, either as a result of trauma or as a result of training or as a result of whatever it might be, have just blocked out the world, and they are able to exhibit complete control over their actions. I don't know how much of a life they have, because they don't, open themselves up to actual relationships where they be with a business brother, right? Or where they be with an actual brother, right?
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
it's a range. And this is where I think the intersection is so important, because we all have so much to learn from each other, just like you and your business partner, business brother, have so much to learn from each other. And it's probably what makes you such a great unit. The goal of the book, the goal of the philosophy of Stoic Empathy, is helping anyone on either side of the spectrum to find their path through the spectrum by recognizing the greatness of each side and finding a way to find that balance for themselves in a manner that is appropriate depending on the situation. Because the amount of emotion and vulnerability you're going to show toward your business brother, very different than the amount of emotion and vulnerability you're going to show a hostile counterpart who is trying to take over your company, right? And those are just very, very different things. But either way, you need to maintain influence over yourself and as much influence as possible over the other through your awareness, right? Either way, that needs to occur, but that spectrum moves and changes.
I love what you said about it's not about basically shutting down your emotions, it's regulating your emotions. And I think that's one thing about Stoicism that so many people get wrong. I got it wrong before my business brother told me all about it, basically. And it is that kind of one or the other of like either you're feeling nothing or you're feeling everything and everyone else's feelings as well. And I think that's the range people see. And like I said, I love that you're helping people find that middle. That you're helping people find the thing that makes sense, basically. So then they can pick and choose depending on the situation. Instead of them kind of reacting, they're responding to it. They're choosing, oh, this person is hostile, I will now go into more stoicism to be, 100% control of myself.
100%.
Versus like if my, knock on wood, if my business brother said he got in an accident, I will now change into empathy because he needs me to be there for him. And I love that we're talking about him and he's like totally unaware, but it is that reality of it. I love that wave of, I love that you call it philosophy as well. It is a philosophy of like learning how to find that middle so then you can choose with that. Then what has kind of been the beautiful thing to that.
And I really like how you filled that in, Leanne, because you just explained beautifully and elegantly that it's not a binary thing, right? There's an in-between. But also the in-between has in-betweens, and those in-betweens have in-betweens. It's a spectrum. Yeah. And so it's finding your place in that spectrum. And the example you just pointed out is it's something that seems to have happened mid-relationship. Oh, wait a minute. This person's hostile. I need to change my approach, right? Because it's not a binary approach, nor is it a trifold approach. It's actually a multiverse of ways of implementing this into your practice. Yeah.
Yeah. And I can see it so much in leadership as well. Like so many people will say like, oh, I'm a micromanager or I'm more of a delegator, but it's the same thing. It's a spectrum. Like you choose how you react through not just the person, but also the situation that you're facing with that person. So it is, like I'm saying, I love the way that you're showing that because I don't think I've seen or read books like that, basically, where it shows that good middle. It's either like, oh, you have to be very empathetic leader, you have to be this kind of leader, or you have to be the stoic leader. You have to make sure that you don't show emotion to your people or you don't develop relationships with them. So it's either usually one or the other. Tell me about the beautiful things that you've seen from people living your philosophy or even from your own life. Like what are the ways that it has shown up since you've kind of solidified and told and taught other people this?
Yeah. Well, I would love to share an example of both, an example from my own life, but also demonstrating how I've seen other people live it. And the reason I like this example, even though it's not in a business context, it's in a parenting context, but the reason I like the example is so many people can relate to it. So about 10 years ago, I was in the middle of mothering my children and they were quite young at the time. They're a little bit older now. They were quite young at the time. And I received some very traumatic news. And my instincts, if I were not around my kids, if I was completely free to be who I wanted to be exactly in that moment, I might have cried, yelled, screamed, even thrown things and punched a wall, right? I mean, there's a lot of reactions that I might have had that I controlled and subdued precisely because of my empathetic reaction and understanding to my children. I know that if I behave in certain ways, it can traumatize my kids. I know I can't protect them from the information. The goal isn't to lie, right? The goal, it's not a choice between either full transparency of everything that you are at all times, or you're a liar and you hide things, right? You can reveal the truth. When I was a kid in Iran and the missiles were falling, I could hear them. I knew the missiles were falling. It's not something my parents were hiding from me, but their reaction, their response to the missiles helped to guide me. Their empathetic understanding of me, my needs, and my emotions helped them to guide themselves. And again, the reason I really love that parenting example is I think everybody can relate to it of, oh, I've done that. I've been there. Wait a minute. I can do this. I'm really good at this. So then what I like doing is, now that we've established you're fully capable of doing this, we break it apart. How do we fully evaluate and understand and analyze this concept so that we can apply it to everyday circumstances? In traffic, when we don't scream, curse words at the driver in front of us, or yelling at our kids, or controlling our temper at work, right? Or creating relationships, long-lasting relationships with business colleagues we don't like and we're never going to like, right? How do we translate these lessons, these things that we're fully capable of in my very extreme trauma parenting example? How do we expand it to be able to impact and influence our everyday life and situations? And so in doing so, I've talked to so many people. Oh yeah, I did that once because I was leading a team and we were up against this horrible deadline and the merger had to happen by the deadline. And one of the documents got lost and there was mayhem in the team and I had to maintain control, and we had to either find the document or find a substitute in order to move forward and close the deal. And so there's so many of these examples that come up. Another one of my examples, one that I really like, and it's a little aggressive, is in the boxing world, right? It's people who literally get punched in the face every day and still manage, the good ones, the successful ones, to maintain strategic thought as they're getting discombobulated. I met a guy who works on the south side of Chicago, and he works with urban youth, at-risk urban youth. And these are youth, he only works with the youth who have exhibited a violent background or a penchant for violence, right? And he takes these kids and he teaches them how to box. Because when you teach a kid how to box, you're not teaching them how to hit. Kid already knows how to hit. What you're teaching them is how to try to think clearly despite being triggered. Right? Yeah. What you're teaching them is, if you get punched, how do you remain strategic? Because that's what these kids need to learn, is when I get triggered, how do I recognize that trigger within myself? And then how do I implement controls within myself that expand that space between stimuli and response? And he does it through boxing. I mean, that might not be the path. You might choose the path of yoga. I've met a lot of people who have found meditation to be a really, really successful way of releasing their ego and expanding the space between stimuli and response and having a completely different relationship with pain, whether it's emotional pain or physical pain. And so when I have these conversations with these people, and literally everybody from like boxers to like Buddhist monks, I learn the remarkable applications of this system, and I always pick up tools like, oh, wait, I can apply it in this context. I can apply it in healthcare. I can apply it to being a stoic doctor, but with a good bedside manner, right? I mean, that's what everybody wants. Nobody wants their doctor to be freaking out when they get rolled into the ER, but you also don't want them to not give a damn, right? And so, so there's that thing. So there's so many wonderful, amazing examples of that. Some of them are extreme and some of them are more how to not swear in traffic, if that is something that you want. I'm not here to moralize or tell you what to do. I'm just here to give you the tools to make these decisions for yourself.
I love that. And it is a tool. And it's now that you've kind of gone through that, like I see it in a lot of different, not just, I guess, professions. Like I see it in like teachers doing that all the time. I see like the doctors and nurses is a perfect example. Is you want a doctor who doesn't freak out, but you also want a doctor who gives a crap about what's happening and actually shows it a little bit. Yeah. You want someone who validates basically like, oh, it's not just in my head. So
right. Yes.
With that philosophy, that tool, if we were to duplicate and perfectly have like a clone of you, if you have like 10, 20, let's say 300, you have a whole army of shares just ready to like change the world in some way, one way or the other, what would you like that change or impact to be?
I would very much like the impact to be the expansion of this philosophy, which is Stoic Empathy, because there could be a million of me. And if every time I'm triggered, I'm doing something that might align with my secondary emotions, but doesn't align with my moral code or value or the person I want to be, I'm not effectuating the change in the world that I want. I might be gaining power, but I'm not staying true to who I am. How do I do both? How do I gain power in this universe, right, over myself? How do I influence others in order to effectuate the world? Maybe leave it a little bit better than I found it, right? Maybe give a little bit more than I took. How do I do that while being intentional? And that is what I would love, is this focus on Stoicism and empathy, walking side by side, holding hands, sometimes clashing, but mostly complementing one another. And if we could do that, and by the way, I mess it up all the time too. It's not something that I've been able to perfect. I'm no Buddhist monk, but it is something I've become much better at with practice. And I hope that with the tools I teach in the book, I can help others get to that same place.
Amazing. I love that. I love the imagery as well of like empathy and stoicism going hand in hand, sometimes clashing, but working together. I love that. So how can people find you? How can people reach out to you? And where can people find your book?
I appreciate it. The book is everywhere. You can find it at Target, Amazon, whatever is easiest for you. If you have a local bookstore and you want to get it from the bookstore, that's fine. Ask them to order it. It'll be available. You can just Google Stoic Empathy. You can go to stoicempathy.com or you can go to sherminkruse.com. I am also on LinkedIn, and I will tell you guys, I do try to respond to almost every message I get on LinkedIn. That's not that, yeah, as long as it's not a very obvious solicitation or an advertisement. I do try to respond. Sometimes it takes me a few weeks, but I do try to get to them. So if somebody wants to reach out, they can. On the website too, you can sign up for my newsletter, which is being launched next week.
Ooh, very, very exciting. So by the time that this recording is out, basically the newsletter would already be out, and you can
yes, the newsletter, the book would already be out. It'll already be a bestseller. You would have already heard about it.
Oh, I would have it on my Kindle very, very soon myself too. So I'll make sure to grab it too. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for sharing a lot of your very, very deep and like, for me at least, mind-changing stories, because I could change my brain chemistry a little bit now, like how to think about this in this context, especially as an entrepreneur myself. So thank you so much for sharing your story, and thank you for being on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. And I have to say, it was an absolute delight to speak with you. You are an extraordinary person, and this was a wonderful conversation. Thank you for having me on.
Again, all of Sher's information is going to be in the description below. I hope you guys enjoyed that interview as much as I did. And of course, if you guys liked this episode, if you guys are watching this on YouTube, make sure to hit the like button right there or interact with us in some way wherever you're listening this from. And of course, I hope you guys have a wonderful day. And remember that small steps matters. And I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.